Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Making Action Happen. I'm Sara Blackhurst.
And I'm Brian McCain.
And we are here with you with the incomparable Jeff Chostner, and we'll talk with him in just a few minutes. But before we get too far into our discussion with him, we want to give a shout out to Butch Chavez's family. Butch has been a wonderful part of our community for a really long time, and he passed on Friday. But he's been an icon in the veteran community here in Pueblo for a really long time.
Yeah, I've worked with him on various projects. We'd always get a wild idea every few years to build a memorial or have a ceremony. I've been working with him for almost 15 years now on stuff, and it was sad to see him go.
Yeah, I would echo those comments. He was great in the Military Affairs Committee. I know he did a lot with the Veterans Administration. I went up to Denver with him a couple of times for some of the substance abuse graduations that they had up there, and he really worked closely with the PTSD guys.
He was so sweet. He would do as much as he could manage when I was over working on the stuff with hospice. So he'd come over and really visit with families and sort of take them under their wing, and he did a whole bunch. But he was always so sweet and so lovely to me every time I saw him, and would call me Hita and do the whole thing. So that's how I know if somebody's actually from Pueblo, if they call me Hita. So he was always like that with me. And so we're certainly going to miss Butch, and all of our love and affection goes out to Butch and his family right now. We know that's going to hurt for a little bit. So, Jeff,
before we move on, I did want to say something about his wife, Pat.
Right.
Well, I know who had gone through that, and you folks know Pat as well from different organizations. So again, our thoughts and prayers with you, Pat.
Yes, for sure. For sure. So we've got Jeff Chostner with us today. I first remember you when I was running the Chamber of Commerce, and you were doing, I was asked to MC the Memorial Day. Do you remember this? This was it feels like 2 lifetimes ago. But you're the keynote speaker for the Memorial Day, remembrance at the cemetery up in Colorado City. I literally had never been to that cemetery before, even though I was the director of the Chamber of Commerce. So somebody said, "Oh, Jeff Chostner," and I didn't know who you were at the time. I knew that you were a local political leader, but I didn't know who you were. So you sent me your bio, and I actually carried that around in my files forever, for the bio that you sent me that's probably a little bit outdated since then. And you came and you gave the most beautiful speech. It made me emotional. I asked you for a copy of it later, and you sent you were very sweet to send the copy, and I carried it around and read it for a long time after that. But ever since then, you've been sort of a friend and a mentor and a colleague of mine. But that was the first time. Do you remember this?
Yes.
I think that was the first time we ever met.
I do. I was still a county commissioner at the time, and I was asked to do the Memorial Day service in Colorado City at the cemetery there, as you mentioned. And I've done it a couple of times, but that's where I first met you there. And I really enjoy that setting because you're there with the mountains and you've still got the prairie, and it's very close to the community.
Yep.
And so it was something that I really enjoyed doing. So, but yes, I remember you from then, and then we have carried on in different capacities since then, all with a view towards trying to do the best thing for the community. As corny as that sounds, that's why I'm in public service. That's why I know what you guys are doing, and so we carry on after all these years to make sure we can do what we can while we can for Pueblo.
And you babysat Brian when he was little?
No. No. At least I don't think so.
No, I don't remember that either.
Yeah. No, I've known Jeff forever, working, again, public service, even if it's political. You know, I get it and he gets it. We're just trying to do what's best for the community. And he's a veteran. I'm a veteran. So we're both kind of tied into the veterans groups here. And I've been going to those for 15 years now, I think. So
I think that's how you initially started. And I think I met you first through Congressman Tipton's office.
Yeah.
I think that was it. You were his local liaison here.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that we're both Air Force veterans, I think that helped a little bit. And again, we are of a temperament that we're not really into partisan politics so much as getting things done.
Yep.
And I found that, quite frankly, I found that in Congressman Tipton, and I found it in Brian. And so we were able to work any number of issues together. On a personal note, I also knew very well his grandmother-in-law. Is that the best?
Yeah. Grandmother-in-law.
Yes.
My wife Jill's grandmother, Nanny, who also passed away recently.
Yeah. So Paul and my wife were close with her and R.J. Schultz. And she was also English. And having lived in England for 5 years, we had a lot of chats about old Blighty, So
she was
a wonderful woman.
She was stubbornly English till the end.
That's a good way to put it.
On the 4th of July, when everybody had their American flags out, she would put up her Union Jack and give everybody dirty looks and complain about fireworks.
You still belong to us.
Yeah.
The empire.
Yeah. But since then, just your political career here in Pueblo has been just second to none. And currently you're serving your second term as the DA?
Actually, I'm in my third term.
Third term.
I'm just finishing up my first year, going into my second year of my third term.
Okay. And one thing right now that we're seeing from these blasts of political ads, because 'tis the season, you have one side of the aisle saying it's a crime tsunami and the other one saying it's better than it's ever been. But I believe in facts. And as the district attorney here in Pueblo, you know the facts about where this is going and what's going on.
Well, I think, you mentioned that and you create some thoughts in my mind about it. It's really kind of true, both sides of that. Mm-hmm. If you look historically, crime in the United States and crime in Colorado, crime in Pueblo is less today than it was in 1970. Mm-hmm. So, but you're going back 50 plus years to get to that level of crime. And of course, the 70s were rife with crime into the 80s. And the legislatures and the Congress responded to that over the years and took away some of the discretion of judges, put in determinate sentencing, harsher sentences, that sort of thing. So from about the early 80s on, crime has actually gone down in America from what it was in the 60s and 70s. So that part of it is true. Mm-hmm. But we live in the here and now.
Yes.
Right.
And it's interesting to talk about what happened in 1970, but I'm more concerned about what happened in 2010, 2015, and 2022. Though, you have to live in the environment we're in now. And the thing that concerns me is that in recent years, crime has started to go back up nationwide in Colorado and in Pueblo. I had worked very aggressively with the chief of police and the sheriff to try and bring crime down and basically with just old gumshoe, hard prosecutor kind of approach to things. And in 2018, crime was down 10%. In 2019, crime was down 17%. So, it was actually working.
Yeah.
Then COVID came along, and then we've had 2 sessions of the Colorado legislature that I think have not been helpful to crime. And there's been any number of bills that have either lessened bail requirements. People with guns are allowed to be back out on the street. That, as you may know, as of today, March 1st, one of the bills, Senate Bill 271 here in Colorado, went into effect, which reclassifies many felonies as misdemeanors and many misdemeanors as petty offenses. Mm-hmm. So you can't get your bang for your buck when you go into court on these people and try and take them off the street. So that's very worrisome to all of us. I think the trend in the last couple of years, while I think some reform is certainly in order, and there's been experimental things that the law enforcement community in my office as well has done here. With that said, we're really concerned that the penalties and the sanctions are not stiff enough to deter crime. When I talk about the experimental things, there's a number of programs that we put into effect. My predecessor, Bill Tebow, and I give him credit for it, put into effect the behavioral health treatment court for people who have mental illnesses. Because of my military background, we've alluded to. When I first came into office, we used that as a model to create the Veterans Treatment Court. Mm-hmm. I represent our office all day Thursday in both of those courts. I've gone back into court because they're so important to me that we do that. And we've had good success with those, I might say. But they are very resource intensive because it takes an attorney or two from my office, somebody from the public defender's office, somebody out of social services, out of probation, a judge dedicated to it, so that you may get good results. But I'm in court on a Thursday, and we may handle 40 cases in both courts. Whereas in a normal docket and a normal attorney will be handling 150 to 200 cases. So you're seeing you get good results with a small group, but the amount of energy, time, and money to get that result is exorbitant, and it's hard for any one of our agencies to maintain that on a full-time basis.
So as far as that goes, I know, because you and I have talked about it before, and I'm going to be facetious and say you've got people lined up around the block for these jobs.
You mean to be one of my attorneys?
Yeah.
Well, that used to be the case.
Right.
Not so much. And I kind of alluded to that a little bit ago. In the last couple of years, I think there's been a trend against law enforcement agencies in general. So you see the recruitment down at the sheriff's office, at the police department, at the state patrol, at the state hospital, the uniform services out there, and by extension with the district attorney's office. Excuse me. So I'm down right now about 8 attorneys, which is about 40% of my attorney staff. So the cases have remained the same. The seriousness, the gravity of the cases have gone up, and yet I have fewer people to actually handle those cases. We carry on. I mean, we do what we can, but I worry, just as a manager of the office, I worry about attorney burnout.
Sure.
I mean, how long can you have people at this excessive level of work before they just say, I've had enough of it? And this is, and I'm sorry, Brian, this is not unique to the Pueblo office. This is happening statewide, and our friends in Colorado Springs or Grand Junction or Denver or Boulder or Fort Collins, they're all seeing the same thing across the board with uniform services as well as with attorneys.
And just to put this in perspective, when it comes to law enforcement and district attorney's office, you know, it's not an 8 to 5 job.
No, it's not.
When you're a police officer and an attorney, it basically swallows your life, and that's hard. And you can see where that burnout comes from. And then, you know, echoing the rhetoric that was kind of anti-law enforcement out there, I have friends that were cops that just quit. They were they're done.
And some of the things too are the liability for individual liability for officers, and they've talked about it for attorneys. And nobody wants to go into this if you don't have some sort of governmental protection for the jobs you do. On occasion, mistakes are made. Everybody makes mistakes, whether you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, you're a dentist, if you're a contractor, you're an architect. Jobs can be made, but to be held personally and in some cases criminally liable for this is driving people away from the profession. Can I add just a couple other of the experimental programs? I mentioned behavioral health and vet court, but we also have the LEAD program that you may be aware of. That's the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. That has been very successful. We've run through about 220 clients in the last 3 years, and the recidivism rate is about half of what our normal clientele is. So, but again, it's very labor and time intensive. You get a great bang for the buck, but there's a lot of bucks that have to be spent to get there. And, you know, you just don't have the time to put that in it. And one other thing, Dave Lucero from the sheriff's office, he and I went to Nashville about a month ago to look at a diversion program that they're using, which is getting some national attention. Again, I think there's portions of that program that can be brought here that's similar to LEAD, but it expands the LEAD criteria.
Right.
But we're looking at that because we understand, you know, there's many facets to crime and it has to be addressed in many different ways. I think we're doing that. I think it was effective. I'm concerned that the legislature has kind of pulled the rug out from underneath us.
They feel pretty disconnected. I remember when we were talking about, and we came out very aggressively against a lot of the legislation that you talked about and some other that we saw that was just this whole push to really, it felt very aggressive, a solution seeking a problem that didn't exist in Colorado. That's how it felt.
I think that's a good way to put it, Sarah. I really do. And there seems to be a push And it's across the board from all institutions to let people out to migrate them back into the community. I think it's premature in so many cases. Mm-hmm. But if you look at DOC, if you look at probation, if you look at parole, if you look at the bail criteria that the judges use, it's all with a view towards integrating people back into the community. I think in general, that's not a bad idea, but you have to make sure these people are ready to do it before you can put them back. The problem that I see, the way it manifests itself, is that 70% of our homicides, 70% of our drive-by shootings, 70% of our officer-involved shootings are with people who are out on some condition of release.
Right.
Yeah.
If they had only stayed in jail for the period that they had been sentenced, you would not have these follow-on crimes. Give you a good example of it. A few months ago, we had a murder over by Centennial High School, and we had a person who was also critically injured in that. The shooter, our defendant, we had convicted of another crime and was sentenced to 6 years. This happened 12 months after that. He was out in 12 months.
Wow.
If he had just served half of his sentence, contemplating what he had done, one person would be alive and one person wouldn't have been injured. And maybe this person would have cooled off a little bit, but he got out and he had revenge on his mind. Mm-hmm. And within 12 months, he was able to wreak it. That's the thing that bothers me, is that we're not keeping people in jail for the adjudicated periods of time, and they're back out on the street causing problems again. We had another situation over in Bessemer where an elderly gentleman was sitting down for dinner one night, and he heard somebody rattling around in the alley and messing with his garage door. So he goes out. There's 3 young men there who are trying to get into his garage. He tries to stop and say, "What are you doing?" They shoot and kill him. Again, out on parole. So you have, those are at least 2 deaths that I can talk about, where if these people had just served their sentence, these other, law-abiding citizens would be alive. So that's worrisome to me.
That's incredibly worrisome.
Yeah.
The other part is this legislation that's being driven. They've, in large part, completely ignored the recommendations of people like you who are on the front lines, who have to make this work, who have to keep safety. They talk about school safety. They talk about other safety, but that felt completely disregarded in the whole process and the whole scheme. We were screaming, look, listen to the law enforcement, listen to the DAs, listen to these people who are actually trying to keep us safe. And that was pretty much thrown out. Has that changed? Do you feel like that's getting better?
Well,
or
we'll see.
Changed at all?
Well, we'll see. We're in the middle of a session right now, and we'll find out what's going to come out of it. I do hear that there's pushback, that maybe there's some reevaluation of what was done in the last 2 sessions, and maybe that needs to be moderated. We'll see whether that translates into bills. Another one, for an example for you, you may hear of POW on occasion. It's possession of a weapon by a prior offender. POW is the acronym for it. And they modified that, and it was kind of a marriage made in hell as far as I was concerned, because you had the far right and you had the far left come together on this. You had the gist of the prior status of the law was that if you were a convicted felon, you lost a lot of privileges of citizenship. You couldn't vote, but one of them was you couldn't possess a weapon.
Right.
So, the far right, this was a Second Amendment kind of thing. You can't take away guns from people who didn't use a gun in the commission of offense. And you got the far left saying this is governmental overreach. We don't think a government should be able to come in and tell people what to do. So people who normally don't agree with each other at all agreed on this one. And so people who are felons now have, certain classes of felons now have guns back in their hands. And Chief Knoller at the police department can show you that since that modification to the POW law went into effect, our shootings are up about 3 times. Wow. And our homicides, as you may know, are double what they were a year ago. We had 29 homicides in 2021 in a community of 170,000 people, which is the 10th judicial district. That's Pueblo County. Mm-hmm. So you got 110,000 of that in the city, and the remainder is in Pueblo County, and that equals about 170,000 people. You should have, and not to be cynical about this, but you should expect statistically you'll have 8 to 12 murders a year in a community of that size. But not 29.
29 is insane.
29 is way too high. And there's a lot of reasons for it. It's not just Palpo, but that's a contributing factor to it. And part of it is not keeping people in jail for the length of time that was adjudicated. So, and of course you can look at the other social factors too, whether you're looking at crime and joblessness and homelessness and all those kind of things. That all contributes. But the things that I'm trying to control and influence are those ones at the legislature that I can have input on.
And to be clear, because we don't want to scare people away from the beautiful city of Pueblo, this is a problem across the board. Yeah. It's not just Pueblo. It's any community you go into.
Absolutely right. And once a month we have a district attorneys meeting where all 22 of us, I don't know how many of your listeners realize this, but there's 22 judicial districts in the state. Ours is the 10th. Mm-hmm. But we get together once a month, and I can tell you we're all experiencing it across the board.
Right.
So much so that the Attorney General, Phil Weiser, and the new U.S. Attorney, Cole Finnegan, came to our last meeting pledging resources to help us take care of this. And Mr. Finnegan has been exceptionally aggressive in his short period. Mr. Weiser has been very helpful to our office in a number of cases, but most notably the Dante Lucas case that some of your viewers may know about.
Yes.
Right.
That was a case that we were successful on a year ago.
Remind people who don't know about this, because this was a really big deal. This was a nationally
this was probably the biggest murder case it was the biggest case in Colorado at the time. And I think maybe in the top 20 nationally. It was featured on 2020 and Court TV and Dateline and whatnot. That's how big it was. But I do want to give Mr. Weiser credit for helping out, because we assembled a really crackerjack team of prosecutors for that, one of which came from his office. He dedicated this attorney down here for 2 years.
Yeah.
That's highly unusual. And then anytime we had an appellate issue or a motion issue, he gave us his appellate staff. He had 2 of his attorneys up in Denver that would intercede on our behalf and help us with that. So it was a really good cooperative effort, and I give Mr. Weiser credit for that. Mr. Finnegan is also helping. I'm sorry to interrupt, Brian. But Mr. Finnegan is really going out of his way to have a discussion statewide, to answer your question, statewide, what can we do? Because, Pueblo's having a problem, but I can tell you it's just as bad elsewhere.
And just to give everybody credit that was involved with that case, that was a long, drawn-out process. And you had to make sure every box was checked and this was done the right way. And I know there was some backlash from the community at times saying, like, that's taking too long. We knew this guy did it and stuff. But the way that your office and everybody involved handled it, it was professional. It did take a while, but then justice was served.
It was, that's an interesting story. That could be a subject of another book, Ryan. But that case really was with me from the time I was first sworn in as DA. I came in January of 2013. And that murder took place the first week of February. So within a month of me coming into office, it had taken place. We didn't actively get involved with it for about 4 years because we kept waiting for law enforcement agencies to be able to crack the case. Me and a select group of folks here, Troy Davenport, Kirk Taylor, people from my office, we all went up to Denver for a cold case review of it, which is very interesting because they'll bring in the FBI, ATF, CBI. They bring in all these investigative agencies, and they'll spend a day looking at your case and just trying to give you ideas. I came out of that as helpful as that was. I didn't think we were moving at a fast pace. You being a military person, and some of your Army viewers out there, I thought we were moving like a large land army about a mile, a week. I thought I needed a commando team to crack the case. So I put together 6 people here locally in conjunction with the CBI, and we met every week saying, what do we need? Who do we need to interview? What piece of evidence do we need tested? We went back and forth and just refined the case until after about 8 months, we got to the point where we're around the table and I said, what else is there? Do we have anything else? And they said, no, sir, this is it. Well, this is as good as this case is going to get. So it was then in my court to say, well, is it good enough to charge?
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, I think we got to charge this. The community needed healing. The family needed healing. one way or another, this case had to be resolved. I could not kick it back in my good conscience and say, this is just too tough to do, or it's not provable or whatever. Right. I said, no, I think we can prove this case. It's going to take a good piece of lawyer in, but I got a great team that can do it. And I thought morally we should go forward. And I thought legally we had the basis to go forward too. So, but anyway, and from there, that team came together, it gelled, and it just got better. It's one of the few cases. I'm sorry, I'm proud of this case.
No.
Yeah.
But it's one of the few cases I've ever seen in my career that got better with time. Most cases that you run into, as you can imagine, witnesses go away, memories fade, evidence degrades, all that sort of thing. That wasn't true in this case. The longer we were on it, the better we got with phone taps, with other physical evidence that we had that we found that we should have had earlier, but we didn't. We got it later. Right. In any event, the case got better over time.
So time really worked in your favor on this, what you were able to get.
One of the few times I can say that time worked in the favor of the prosecution.
Wow.
And tell everybody how it all ended up.
It ended up with a conviction, and fairly quickly too. I may be off a little bit on this, but basically, final arguments were made throughout a morning. It went to the jury immediately after lunch, about 1:00 in the afternoon, and they were back before 5:00.
Wow!
Yeah, so it was super fast.
It went very quickly. So within about 4 hours, they took a case that took us 8 years. To break. I mean, from the time of Kelsey's death until we got a conviction, it was roughly 8 years.
So I'm going to ask one more crime question.
I'm sorry if I'm
No. That's what we want to hear. But I want to get into some more lighthearted, fun stuff after this. But when it comes to specifically the shootings here in Pueblo, would you say is it random shootings? Is it like somebody breaking into a house, or is it the victim connected to the shooter?
It's not random. Okay. And I think people should not be afraid that they drive down the main street of Pueblo and that somebody randomly is going to shoot them. Right. It is, unfortunately, kind of restricted to an area or two of town and within a certain demographic. And if you're not in that side of town, and if you're not in that demographic, young and a gang member, Pueblo is a great community, and you're not going to run into it. Yeah. Same way, there's a lot of attention paid to carjackings. That's true, that kind of went up again. But again, it's happening in a certain part of town. It's happening within a certain group of people who run together. And quite frankly, there's a certain level of stupidity for people who leave keys in the cars running on a cold morning. I mean, there's a certain amount that this is self-inflicted.
No. Right.
So I hate to say that. And of course, we'll go after them for taking the car. The fact that the opportunity is there does not excuse them.
Yes.
But you need to take that opportunity away from them. Yeah.
The best deterrence for people breaking into my car is there's a lot of trash in it because I have a lot of kids. And funny enough, we were getting something to eat somewhere here in town, and we saw some people looking in cars. I'm like, oh, they're looking for stuff, and they got to our car and they kind of leaned in and looked and shook their head and walked away. And I'm like, see, that's why I don't clean the van out, dear.
Well, and I say that, but I had a leaf blower stolen from a shed. Little things. I've had my wife had a little sculpture by the fence on the thing. The sculpture went missing. So we've had very, very minor things too. Yeah. But some of that's just living in the inner city, which is where I chose intentionally to live when I came back. Pueblo was my hometown. I didn't want to live on the outskirts. I wanted to live in the heart of things. Yeah. And it's been a great benefit to me that we've been able to do that.
Yeah. Well, okay. Fun stuff now, or more lighthearted.
Wait, I need one more.
Okay.
Give me one more.
One more.
So, Jeff, what is a solution that you're working on right now? We like solutions around here. So let's talk a solution
for crime.
Yeah. I
do have faith in a lot of these specialty courts that we've done. Like I say, they're labor, time, and resource intense, but they work on what we refer to as individual harm reduction, as opposed to crime reduction. If you're familiar with it, so it helps an individual, but it does help with crime reduction because if you can stop somebody from needing drugs, can get somebody a job and decent housing. crime will go down with that individual.
Right.
And if you get enough of those individuals,
then it doesn't spread. And
it doesn't spread.
Because it's so interlocked. It's not random. It's not, just whatever it is within certain groups and within certain connections.
And I've seen it statistically with our recidivism rate on lead, but I've seen it with the other courts. What I've been trying to drive, and I worked with the judiciary a little bit. I worked with Judge Carnes. I'm now working with Judge Ernst. She's new to it, but I'm sure she and I will have the same, philosophical bent on this. But I'm trying to have an overall comprehensive view of crime. One, just being tough. We're going to put felons and deadly people off the street. Get them off the street and have them stay off the street. For the other people that we can help who aren't ordinarily criminals, then I want to do things through the LEAD program, through behavioral health, through Veterans Court, through this diversion program that we're looking at in Nashville. I have a juvenile diversion program in my office. And what I've been working on with Judge Karn and now Judge Ernst and a number of people is to try and get people who were picked up for substance abuse to get them out of jail earlier if we can. But the thing that I've said is I want post-incarceration treatment.
Right.
It doesn't do me any good to say this guy served time. We let him out on the streets and literally within 2 hours, he's with his buddies back at it. 2 hours to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But if we can, I've said I will let them out of jail early if I can get them in a treatment program in a treatment facility. We don't have that yet.
Right.
But we're working on that. So I do think that there's some light at the end of the tunnel with regard to crime. The other thing, though, and I can't completely divorce myself from this, is social conditions that lead to crime.
Right.
And when I was on city council years ago, I came to the conclusion that the best thing that you can do to stop crime is to put people to work, have a breadwinner in the family. Because if you have a breadwinner in the family, they tend, substance abuse is down, spousal abuse is down, kids tend to be in school, you tend to be in social organizations, all those kind of things trend in the right direction if you are financially sound.
Right.
If you don't have a breadwinner in the family and money's not there, substance abuse is up, too much drinking. The domestic violence goes up because there's this underlying anger. Kids aren't doing well in school. They're not going to Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. They're not going to church. All those kinds of things trend in the wrong direction. So I to the extent that I can, I do try and work a little bit with city council and with the county commissioners on doing things that help the community become more prosperous, put people to work. And I think it has a knock-on effect on the crime rate.
So treating the disease, not the symptom.
Yeah. That's right.
And it's important, too, to realize that, especially after COVID and everything, all the craziness of the world right now, everybody falls on hard times and they're just humans. They're people. And you don't want to ruin somebody's life, which will inherently ruin everybody's life around them, or could possibly do that by just locking them in jail and throwing away the key. Like, this is truly actually trying to help people to better society and human beings.
Yeah, it's a balance of trying to, modulate that syncopated, that I don't mind being hard and going after felons and putting them in jail. I have no conscience about that.
Yeah. But
there's a whole group of people that you can help that the criminal justice system doesn't directly assist.
Yeah. Right. And we have that conversation just down in the valley because they have some substance abuse issues there, but somebody goes to jail, they lose their Medicaid benefits and then they get out, and housing was a big one too. That one of their programs down there was a former addict is part of this board that basically advises this commission on specifically opioid abuse. And she was like, I'm out of jail. I did get clean in jail, couldn't rent a place, couldn't find a place. So where do I go? I go to my friends that I used to use with and go to their couch, and then it just starts over.
You're sitting watching the TV on the couch, and somebody starts passing the stuff around. Yeah,
and that's the only ones that are embracing them are the people that they were getting into trouble with in the first place.
I just saw a person this morning, not involved in the criminal justice system at all, a hardworking guy. And this is kind of the unintended consequence of prosperity. But, housing prices are going up in Pueblo.
Right.
We've been discovered and all that. Well, the fella who owned the house that he was in, decided to sell it because the prices are up.
Yep.
And so he's out on the street with a wife that's in a wheelchair, and he hadn't done anything wrong. He's a law-abiding citizen.
Right.
So imagine that, he's saying, where do I go? What do I do?
Can't afford anything else.
I can't afford anything else. And he's never been in trouble.
Yeah.
So just imagine the person who has been in trouble, and his likelihood of getting decent housing is even less. So,
Yeah. Well,
lighthearted.
Yes, lighthearted. No, because I wanted to get into this while we have time.
Yeah,
we got about 25 more minutes till 2:30.
Okay,
that's okay. So retired colonel from the Air Force. Mm-hmm. You were a JAG officer, correct?
Yes, sir.
But you come from a tradition of military service, and you love history as much as I do, and you have written some books about your family, about your father, about Pueblo. Tell us about some of the books you have out there.
I'm just, I'm just kind of a history geek, and then that kind of translates into personal history as well. Mm-hmm. And my grandfather was really the one who did the genealogical work. But we've had relatives in the service, not professional or career folks, but in the service since the Revolution. So, and on both sides of the Revolution, both sides of the Civil War. So, I guess we can't make up our mind.
Yeah,
but he was the one who kind of documented it first. My dad died early when I was 12. And so he was kind of the main male figure. My grandfather was in my life. He was a World War I vet. Mm-hmm. And like me, he was kind of a pack rat when it came to letters and documentation and whatnot. So he had saved about 275 letters, postcards, telegrams from my dad during World War II back home. Mm-hmm. I knew about those. So I gathered up all of those, and in about 2009, I published a book on my dad, mm-hmm. And his 9 other buddies from Central. You're a Central guy, right?
Mm-hmm. I am a Central guy.
And so I referred to him as the Central 10, mm-hmm. and I transcribed all the letters. And then I did a kind of an introduction as to who these guys were. And then I did an epilogue as to what happened to all 10 of them after the war. So I put that together.
I have both those books on the shelf. Shall I grab them?
Yeah, get them.
And at the time I wrote them, 3 of the 10 were still alive.
Wow.
So I had the chance to kind of reconnect with my dad through them all these years later. Yeah. But interestingly enough, my grandfather never told me, and I discovered that he had letters that my grandmother had collected from him during World War I.
Oh, wow.
So I took his letters, and this was, 40 years after he had passed on, and put together kind of this tale of my grandparents meeting each other. He had come out here. He had worked for the Rock Island and worked down at the train depot in 1916, and had met her she went to Centennial, and he had met her through high school dances and whatnot. And then the war broke out, and he enlisted. And the letters between them kind of discuss what's going on in France. He was involved in the St. Mihiel drive in September 1918, which, as an Air Force guy, you might be interested, was the first combined operations between, although it was the Army Air Corps, between Army Air Corps and the Army. So it was the first combined operations. And he was at St. Mihiel. Wow. And then the book goes up through their wedding about a year after the war.
Wow.
So interestingly enough, though, I had less texts from my grandfather, but I had more photos than my dad. I had more text from my dad, but fewer photos. So you would have thought the technology would have just been the opposite, but it's what they collected.
Well, and those stories are important. I was part of the Veterans History Project where we interviewed people, and I got into that when we visited my uncle growing up. He lived in Idaho, and that side of my family, they were all from Germany. Mm-hmm. So they came over as kids pre-World War II and spoke perfect German. So when World War II kicked off,
World War I,
they were in World War II. They were all OSS guys.
Oh, really?
Yeah. 2 of my uncles, they went in the OSS when they were younger because they could speak German.
Maybe I anticipated you, but I thought you were going to tell me speaking perfect German because, after World War I, Germans were discriminated in this country,
yes.
and to integrate, they all stopped speaking German.
Yeah. They spoke English at home, but they came over right after World War I, probably. And then when World War II happened, the kids, they were of military age at the time. I think my uncle said he lied about his age, just like I believe my grandfather did too. And he went straight into the OSS, and that's what he did. And he never talked about it. And then just one day when he was getting older, he sat us down. I was like 12, and he opened up his treasure chest of everything from the war, and we're just like, holy cow.
Yeah.
I mean, and he told us stories.
You know, Wild Bill Donovan and some of those folks?
He knew, one of the guys he was with was on, was it Green Acres?
Oh,
yeah. Green Acres.
Eddie Albert.
Yeah.
And he was a, I just tripped across something about him too. He was at D-Day, but he was also an OSS.
Yeah. And he was with him. He had pictures with him at some point, but, you know, he was showing us, he kept some of these weapons that they used to do back then, not so much anymore, but he still had his smatchet, which was basically a knife they carried, but it was weighted. So it kind of looked like a hatchet, and it had the garrote wire on it. Mm. And, you know, as a kid looking at that, saying like, what is this for? And he's like, well, you know, you could just split somebody open or do this. And, he had a gas gun too that they used that was real quiet that can do. But then after that, I started digging in, and both on my mom and dad's side, kind of going through the history, because none of these people talked about it. Yeah. Like at all. Yeah. Like he was a truck driver in Idaho. That was it. You know, my grandfather retired here, and nobody talked about it. And we had a pry, and it was important for people to hear those stories you know, you have to preserve that history, because as we're seeing in the world today, history repeats itself.
Absolutely.
And we need that.
Fortunately, I think people are recognizing it today as to that. My grandfather had the Midwest Business College, which is down on the Pope Block on 4th Street. And my grandmother ran a store called Silver State Music Company, and she sold it to the Martin family. And many people here in Pueblo remember Martin Music. Mm-hmm. It was my grandmother who started.
Oh, wow.
Well, my mom went to Midwest Business College. Yeah. And, you know, in those days, she was really smart. She could have been engineering, math, or whatever, but her dad said, you're a girl, you can't do those things. So you're going to go and learn how to type and be a secretary at Midwest Business College. Yeah. So she got her degree there.
It may have been my grandmother, because my grandmother did shorthand. She did typing.
My mom
she did
knew how to do all those things.
I bet she might have been her teacher.
Probably.
But you know, in those days too, particularly after World War II, you either went to the service, you went to university, but it was a very small slice of American society that went to university. You went to a business college, or you went to the steel mill. You know, so the options were pretty clear. So you may be right about channeling her that because she was female. I think that's probably right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, it was probably bettering her as a way to get out.
To get out and to do something more.
A bunch of people went to the business college. Sam Corsentino went there. Chris Munoz went there. Art Gonzalez went there.
Oh, yeah.
So I would always bump into people that say, you know, I went to the school, and they gave them a leg up in life in those days.
Yeah, for sure.
Last thing I'll say is, I'll get off this, but my grandfather, as I say, was in the Army, World War I, and in the book, I discovered a letter that he sent to the War Department at that time. It wasn't the Defense Department, but to the War Department on December 8th, 1941.
Oh, wow.
Offering to rejoin.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And as we all remember, December 7th, Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
But that was a Sunday. The next day, Monday, he shot off a letter to the War Department saying, I want to, you know, re-enlist.
And what was their response?
The response is in there too. Thank you very much. We appreciate your patriotism and all, but we think we got it.
We think we got it.
We think we can win this one without you.
That was after.
Yeah, and he was. Yeah, I think at that time he was about 47 years of age. So
wow,
he was a little beyond draft age.
Yeah. Well, after September 11th, when I deployed, like immediately after, our first sergeant had retired the month before. He's like, just let me sneak in a bag. I'll just come. You know, he was like, he was gearing to go, and they were like, you can't go. You are old. You cannot go. But, you know, Pueblo, it's all roads lead to Pueblo, and anything I've done, whether it's in working on the Hill in DC, anywhere, it seems like there's some weird connection to Pueblo with people.
I keep telling people, I've coined this phrase that Pueblo is the hub of the universe.
Yeah.
You know, everybody passes through here in some connection one way or another. They may not stay, but they have touched this place.
Yeah, and it's even, like I said, in Washington, D.C., you throw a rock, you hit somebody from Pueblo.
Yeah.
And they may have just like been born here and moved away or have family here. And it was to the upper levels of the government, you know, from even like Dana Perino, who was the press secretary from Pueblo,
absolutely.
You know, anybody like that. But, you know, Pueblo does have a rich history of presidents visiting, VIPs coming here, you know, influential people. Yeah. So out of everybody everybody that's ever been here in Pueblo, what's your favorite person or favorite story of somebody visiting Pueblo?
Somebody who came.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Sarah has put this book on President Kennedy.
There's that one.
But I'm trying to actually think of other people that I saw or met here in town in my youth. I had a friend that lived in Canyon City, and in those days, Buckskin Joe used to be used for movie sets. So I met Warren Oates and Lee Van Cleef because their parents had a friend who ran the old Canyon City Reporter, so they would do a cast party. Oh, cool. Welcome. And so I got invited when I was in high school to go see some of these guys. So that was kind of interesting. So that kind of thing. But the one that I didn't see, and which led to the book, was President Kennedy. And I was torn between going to see him, and I thought it was important to see President Kennedy. But I also had a baseball game to play.
So that's how we know you're a real Pueblo boy.
Yeah.
If you're gonna play baseball overseeing a president, that means you're from Pueblo.
And I went up to the fields at East High School to play my old timers game up there. And my coach was a fellow named Bill Lucero. And I don't know whether you know Judge Lucero, Bill Lucero, but he was quarterback for East, and he was quite a wrestler and all-around athlete. But he is now the presiding disciplinary judge for the state of Colorado. He's appointed by the Supreme Court. So the last thing a lawyer wants to get is a letter from Judge Lucero because you're seeing a disciplinary judge. But so I went up and played, and I've got pictures of that with Bill playing up there.
And did
so
you
I
say
didn't
Old
go.
Timers?
That's the name of it, the Old Timers League.
Okay.
Many of your viewers will remember Old Timers.
But you were a kid at the time.
I was a kid. That's what it was called.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was like the Babe Ruth League.
Gotcha.
I just found out one that I didn't even know. Roosevelt visited Pueblo, and there's a project out east that's I think a solar project. And they were looking what to name it, and he came out there to visit it, and so they might name it the Rough Riders Solar Project.
Oh yeah,
no spoilers, no spoiler alert. Sorry. I won't say whose land it is, but
you can figure it out pretty quick.
There's been quite and as I understand it, again, I'm kind of a history geek and a Pueblo history geek. As I understand it, I was trying to figure out which Roosevelt you were talking about because I think FDR came through here on a whistle stop tour, but Teddy Roosevelt came through to dedicate the YMCA.
Okay,
and old Puebloans will remember that was down on like 8th and Greenwood or something. It's been torn down. But he was here in 1908. Something like that. I may be off on the date, but while he was still president, he came here and dedicated the new YMCA. Okay,
I'd see. I didn't know that. Like I know most of them, but that was one that
he came through. And of course, probably the most famous one is Woodrow Wilson, right? Because he came to dedicate Memorial Hall, and it's called Memorial Hall for the World War I vets,
right?
So he came there. He was pushing the League of Nations. He talked there. And then got on the train to make another stop at another town. And he got to about Avondale and he was feeling poorly. And they stopped the train. And this is based on newspaper accounts. I'm not making this up. So they stopped the train. He got off in Avondale and he walked from the train tracks down towards the Arkansas. And can you imagine here? There's vets sitting on they've only been out of the Army a year.
Yeah.
Right.
And come walking down the street, the President of the United States. And I think they got, it was harvest time. It was in November, and I think they gave him some apples and some other vegetables, that kind of thing, or fruits, and got him back on the train. And shortly thereafter is when he had his stroke.
Yeah. Right.
And so they opened up the lines from from Avondale to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Again, another hub of the universe story.
Yeah.
Because, then you get into Mrs. Wilson, who many think was in a way the first woman president de facto, because nobody saw President Wilson for about 5 months.
Yeah.
And she was the one that took in letters to be signed and all that. So it's an interesting story.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Again, Pueblo's the center of the universe.
And I'm sorry, I'm sure we're boring your visitors.
No, this is interesting. This is what I wanted to talk about.
So, and we'll get back on something more serious. So, one time I was at my grandparents' house up on Van Buren, and I forget how it came up, but my grandmother said, well, your dad was in the movie Wilson. And I said, no. And Wilson, if you look back on it, it was a legitimate movie with Frederick March. Yeah. It was nominated for an Academy Award. And it was a World War II movie that tried to link up the generations, fathers and sons. You fought in Europe in 1918, and we were back there in 1944. It's a 1944 movie. She said, yeah, your dad came home and he wanted clothes, jackets, and stuff to look like, somebody who from 1918. And they filmed, if you ever see the movie Wilson, they filmed it at the train depot. And they have Frederick March as Wilson come there, and he's talking from the back of a train on a whistle-stop tour. But they show crowd scenes. So, I don't know, about 25 years ago, I was telling my wife and kids, I said, yeah, my grandmother said, Dad's in let's look. So we watched the film. It was a nice little historical film anyway. And honest to God, crowd scenes, there's my dad, front and center, wearing a hat and a coat. I had to stop the film to just take a look at. I hadn't seen him since I was 12 years old, and there he was.
Oh my gosh, right there.
Yeah, right there.
Wow.
So, and my aunt was in it too. So
we're gonna have to go find that now. It's probably on Amazon. Yeah.
I think so.
It's people know about the movie. It's not like it's an old movie. So in a sense, people don't know it, but it's out there. People are aware of it.
We watched it in school, I think. Middle school or grade school? I remember.
But it was filmed here in town, or part of the stroke scene, the heart attack scene was filmed here.
Yeah. Well, I was always disappointed because in school they always said that RoboCop was filmed at the steel mill, and then it was like Terminator 2. None of that really happened. But the National Lampoon's Vacation, they stopped at the hotel on Lake Avenue and then went out to Avondale, and that was Cousin Eddie's house. For your
viewers here with Action 22, I'm sure folks downstream are all aware of Mr. Majestic, right? Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Charles Bronson, Linda Crystal.
Yeah.
I think the Majestic's bar is still there in Manzanola or Swink, one of the two. But where Bronson drank beer. So
and then what's the other one? It's a bed and breakfast now, but Indiana Jones childhood house.
No, we watched that last night, and it's in the house is in Antietam, and it was in Chama there when they're riding the train. That's over Chama Pass, and that's all. It's funny because we were watching that last night. With the kids.
That's cool. Well, as we're wrapping up, I tend to ask my veteran guests, what can you do to help out fellow veterans? What's just one piece of advice? We got into the thank you for your service or that type of thing, but how do you feel that somebody can help out veterans right now?
This is not to be too hard-nosed about it. When I hear the thank you for your service, the first thing I say is you don't have to thank me. I volunteered. Yeah. But if you really want to thank me, why don't you join or have your kid join? Because you have 0.5% of the American public defending the other 99.5% of it. That is morally not right. Yeah. We all have to have buy-in to this country. I noticed, and kind of on a similar note, I noticed in the paper, a congressman was saying everybody in this country needs to pay a tax. I actually am sympathetic to that because you've only got about 50% of the country paying a tax. Well, I don't care if you have to pay $50, but you need to feel like you're part of the club. Yeah. And I think everybody should pay something to be here. And I think some sort of service to this country should be required. Now, I don't think it can be the old draft that we had, in the 60s. But I think government service is. And if you say you can either choose your branch of service, or you can go to VISTA, or you can go to the Peace Corps, or you can go to the Civilian Conservation Corps. I don't care what it is. I think 2 years of government service should be required. I think there is a general feeling in the country that's true. But when you try and translate that into actual political action and the Congress had to vote on an actual draft, I don't think it can happen. I don't think there's the political will to do it. Probably the last time in our lifetime that could have happened might have been 9/11. But in terms of those who have served, I think some of the things they have restored, the GI Bill, I think back to what the old World War II one, that has been restored. I think that's good. It's not modified. So that people can buy a house, get an education. I think that's good. I think I'm not sure because I haven't been directly affected by it, but to make sure a tune-up in veteran services, so like our friend Butch Chavez that we were talking about and others, make sure they're adequately cared for. I mean, isn't that what Lincoln said after the Civil War? To bind up the wounds, take care of the widow, the orphan, that sort of that have suffered from the war. I think that's the least we can do for these folks. So I don't know that really answered your question. No, Ryan, because it's a tough nut to crack.
It is.
But that's kind of my views on some of the things too.
And
can I say one thing too about if you brought a draft back, and you're talking about the contentious nature of the country we're in, and you and I have always reached across party lines and make sure we do the best for folks, but I think one of the things we have to bring back in this country is a feeling that we're all part of the same country. Even if we disagree on where that country should go, and we all need to remember we're all part of the great American family, and we all need to take care of each other and respect each other's opinions on things. And I think that has been lost. I've never tried in my political life to be excessively combative or to be excessively partisan. I don't think that gets things done. And I don't think the public needs to be barked at by their politicians.
That's a big one.
and I won't do that. I would rather just hold it and take it, realizing that, that goes with the job. But I always say, I try and be honest with people, and I try and shoot straight with them. People talk about transparency. What I tell people is, since I'm an elected official, I owe you an answer. You ask me a question, I owe you an answer. I don't owe you the answer you want.
That's a very valid point.
But I owe you an answer so that you know where I stand on issues. Now, to the extent, and probably 85% of the time, I can give an answer that takes care of them. But there's going to be a certain percentage that I can't, and they need to know that up front. But they deserve an answer.
Yes.
And you always deliver on that. So my last question is this. The three of us have spent our entire careers serving our community, every single one of us. So what needs to be done to serve our community, on our local community and the region right now? What's the most important thing that we can do?
From me, being an old Pueblo boy, and my family goes back here to 1875. I had a Union cavalry officer come out here about 10 years after the war and set up shop. And so my heart and soul is in Pueblo. We're talking about it being the hub of the universe. I often say, too, Pueblo has a great magnet under it that draws people back, and I'm one of those that back. You too. My observation is that I think this community needs a vision. I think it needs to have some sort of vision as to where it is and where it's going. And I think that needs to be articulated. I think we are one of the great communities in Colorado along the Front Range. And I think since the steel mill went down and Army Depot went down, for the last 30 odd years, we've been kind of trying to figure out who we are and cobble an economy back together. And we've done some of that. We brought some of it back, but it hasn't been the constant paycheck that the steel mill or the PAD would bring you to support those families that I was talking about before, so that they trend in the right direction because they have a paycheck every Friday night coming, and health care and all that sort of thing. I think what I would like to see is a vision articulated for Pueblo as to who we are and where we want to go. Do we want to become part of the great I-25 economy and hook into Colorado Springs and Denver, maybe bring Trinidad with us? Or are we our traditional east-west economy along rail lines from Salida to the Kansas border? Are we that, or some combination of that? But we have an airport that needs to be developed. We need to somehow lower the rhetoric and bring Pueblo West into a greater Pueblo cooperation. So you don't have this tripod of Pueblo County, Pueblo City, and Pueblo West fussing with each other unnecessarily.
Yes.
So we all work together and we promote ourselves together. So I'd like to see that. I'd like to see. Everybody talks about economic opportunity. That's a given. But I want to see an economy that raises the prosperity level. And that means a better quality community, not a better quantity community, but a better quality community. And whether that's with jobs, whether you bring the arts into it, whether you bring the aesthetics into this so that we look better. Most people up north see us from I-25. That's not the most attractive version of going through Pueblo to see. Is there a way that we can enhance that so we look – Pueblo was once known as being the park city of the state. Is there a way to bring that garden atmosphere and aesthetic back? And arts are part of that. And it has to be a holistic, comprehensive view of who we are and where we're going, with all of us trying to bring the prosperity level up so we can do so much more. Pueblo is known for doing things by its bootstraps. Mm-hmm. And we particularly have since the demise of the old steel mill. And there's got to be a way to take that energy, to take that grittiness and to put it into effect, take our history. We're the real Colorado. We're the real deal. We're where, you had native people and you had Hispanics here. You had the cattle drives here. You had the railroads here. Mm-hmm. It is the best of Colorado here. And somehow we need to be able to put that together and market it to the betterment of all the people here. And I think it can be done. And I have great faith, and that's why I came home and worked on city council and worked as a county commissioner, now worked as DA. Those are all separate pieces of the pie.
Right.
But there's got to be a way to put it all together. And, that's what I want to do with the remaining time that God's given me. I want to be able to do what's right by my community, because so much of the success I had in life came from here, whether it was families, the school system that I went through, the sports that I went through, the friends that I made, the girls I dated, the whole that's what makes who you are. And I want to give back to this community. Yeah. One last little thing you may have seen in the paper earlier this week as a example of that, they're doing groundbreaking for an expansion of Ben Franklin Elementary School. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
I was called back as one community member to have a shovel and dig because I'm a graduate of Franklin Elementary. I could even remember the school song and sang it to the kids. So that's how much of a Pueblo geek I am.
Of course you could.
But that's not to get off track. And I know I'm being long-winded here, Sarah and Brian, but I love this community. Mm-hmm. I came back to try to do better with it. I haven't always succeeded. I fail like a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But hopefully my batting average has been good. Mm-hmm. And hopefully people know that I love the place and I'm trying every day to make it better.
Well, Brian and I are fans of yours and the work you do. So thanks for sipping in some time with us. We've been wanting to do this for a while.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it. I know you have a lot on your plate and a lot that you're doing, but thanks. We appreciate you doing all of that. Anything else?
Yeah. For any questions, comments, or concerns, please email us at show@action22.org. And if you're not a member of Action 22, you need to be a member. We have a housing summit coming up April 29th. That's taken off to a whole new level than we thought it would. It's going to be huge.
Yeah.
Any questions about that, you can email us and visit our webpage, action22.org. We have all of our membership info, or again, you could just email us and we'll get that to you.
All right. Thanks for being with us, and we will be back with you next week. We have a couple of people who want to be on the show, so we don't know who that's going to be yet, but we'll be back. So thanks to Jeff and thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.